Welcome to the Tom Nelson podcast. Today, I'm very happy to have Joe Bastardi here to talk about weather and maybe some climate. Joe, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself to get us started?
Yeah, that rings a bell. That's why I'm with Weather Bell. See how quick I am.
That was really good.
Well, I'm the chief meteorologist at weatherbell.com after being the chief long-range hurricane forecaster at AccuWeather, where I worked for 33 years. During that 33 years, I worked 40 years of hours because I was known as overtime man. I could not get enough of the weather. Basically, if I did not have to sleep, I wouldn't. And the great thing about AccuWeather is, people were always calling in sick and all this other stuff, and I just picked up their overtime, and I absolutely loved what I did. I do think that what happened later was that and they always treated me very well. Dr. Myers always treated me well, but I think the company mission sort of changed, and you can sense that now when you read a lot of the stuff coming out of there. It's fortuitous that God gave me enough of a nudge to get out before, they began to worship at the altar of global warming or man-made global warming.
Okay.
And a lot of that is because that's where all the money is. I understand that. When you run a business, you're responsible for a lot of things. I mean, whoa! Yeah, we're back. I just had an interesting accident. I'm getting ready to go work out after I get through talking with Tom. So maybe it's fortunate because the drink, there's no caffeine in it, but it's a lot of amino acids, and so it gets me wired up a little bit more. I believe in natural stuff rather than drugs. But no, but what I was saying was when the company's mission, we were always a meteorology company, and then it became a media company that was using the weather. That's very different. And I sort of was unaware of the change, although I did notice, one of the reasons I came to the forefront there is because in 2002, I won this won the North American Bodybuilding Championships, drug free. And I couldn't figure out how I was that good in that because I really don't have the genetics to do that. And I wasn't, no drugs or anything like that. And yet, and what God made me to do, I wasn't that good. I realized I was worried about everybody around me, worried about what this guy thought, that guy thought, the company, the whole thing. And there was always this attitude, we always use consensus. And listen, consensus with Elliot Abrams, Joe Sobel, and Joel Myers, and if I could get thrown in there, that's a good consensus. But when you have guys, 22 different forecasters, and half of them are still just out of college and down the bars all night. I don't really look at that way, and I started getting kind of resentful. Like, why should I pay attention to some guy who knows not working as hard as me, don't have my standards? And then again, though, what really attracted to me is the top people there. I'll tell you what, the 1980s and 90s, that was the number one place in the world to work in the weather. And people say, "Oh, you're exaggerating." I go, "No, these guys are really good." Joel had the foresight to start the company. I mean, he was on to tell the truth because this is why he was young. He was like 27 years old, doctor, PhD out of Penn State, was starting his own weather service to compete against the government, and everybody was laughing at him. So it's a great story. And as time goes on, things change. Well, I always figured that the weather was all I had, and next to my mom and dad, who've just passed away, I've loved the weather longer than anything. I've had a personal relationship with the weather. Later in my life, I realized that God gave me that. Yeah, I used to always look at the weather. I guess I made the weather my God. And of course, when you do stuff like that, if climate's your God, guess what? You're going to do anything you can to defend your God. And what you have to do is realize that these things, well, what I have to do, I'm not going to tell you what you should do. But what I realized was these things were given to me as a gift to get closer to God. So consequently, pursuit of the truth trumps everything. And constant fighting of deception. If the truth is a trait of God, what is a non-truth? What is hiding the truth? Okay, including from yourself. I've had people accuse me of, he's doing that to get attention and all this. Well, let me tell you something. If you're looking to get popular and money and all that stuff, I'm on the wrong side of that issue. If I were to consider that, I mean, the idea as well, oh, I see the light, I'm doing this and doing that, probably be beneficial for my company. My company's based in New York City. And we have guys that, in the company that believe that CO2 is more of an influence than I certainly believe. But on the other hand, that doesn't get in our way, so to speak. What does get in our way is the fact that, listen, if you're in the private sector, you have to make money. So I have to be right. And I tell that to people all the time. I said, look, I'm 67 years old, I'm still standing. I have to add value because, the Weather Service, Environment Canada, they're all getting better. They're very, very good. All right. And you get the difference between me and them is they are very intense, but I notice they're very model focused. They dissect models. They love to dissect. I love to dissect the weather and then use the models. And the weather just simply fascinates me. And it's the greatest teacher of humility you could possibly have. And that's another thing too. I used to always have to defend a point because I felt my manhood or whatever was on the line. Then I realized, you'll get a lot smarter a lot quicker if you're the dumbest guy in the room, because then you'll see everything. If you're the smartest guy in the room, the only thing you see is what you know. And the Apostle Paul said, those who know what they know don't yet know what they ought to know. So what does that tell you? That tells you you're not going to gain anything by just being, looking at what you want to look at. So, it's why people get mad at me because I defend Michael Mann at times because he's written a lot of good stuff. A lot of his AMO studies are very, very good. He just came up to this conclusion, and that's whatever. He can accuse me of, it's because you're a conservative or whatever. And I think he borders on socialist. So, but that doesn't get in the way of what he can give me. All right. It's just like Bill Nye. People like Bill Nye, to me, they're great people. People go, how can you say that? Look what he says about you. Well, he's got this one part of him. But what about the rest of him? What about all the other stuff he's done for science? So that's how I look at it. Now, when you start getting to the politicians that are using this, I have no tolerance for them. I pray about it all the time. Don't snap out. John Kerry is just like, I watch these people. They have no business. I believe Michael Mann has earned his keep, or says some of the other guys on the other side of the issue. You've all earned your keep to make your argument. I mean, goodness, you've done so much research. Me, I've done forecasting. I've done more forecasting than you. I do more forecasting in 2 weeks than a lot of these people have done their entire lifetime. And my opinion is climatologists need to forecast the weather globally for a couple of years. All right. That should be just like I had to take climatology. I loved climatology because my dad, who's a meteorologist, said, listen, if you know what happened yesterday, if you recognize it today, you have a chance to hit tomorrow. So that's just, yeah, you're right. If I recognize this, but with Sandy, we called Sandy on October 21st. Why? Because the pattern looked like it was going to Hurricane Hazel. The big trough was going to dig into the east and capture whatever was coming out of the Caribbean. So we got out in front of it. Texas freeze. It looked like 1899. I mean, you can see that evolving. You say, well, where are these maps of 1899? They're on the Weather Prediction Center site, right? The surface maps. You could tell what's going on when you look at the surface maps, the way pressures are building and different things like that. The computer models are just horrible. They're horrible with cold air, especially in this day and age of the warmer planet. They're just constantly trying to wash out cold air, replace it with broad scale warmth. Then they get that warmth and they start feeding back on it, and off to the races it goes. So this is what's going on. I realize what's going on because I have to forecast all the time, and I got a little bit of pressure on me. And I believe that God didn't put me on earth to be wrong. I don't believe. See, that's the thing. Yeah, I have humility. I will kneel before my heavenly Father, but against everything else, you're supposed to get up and do what you're supposed to do. I mean, not just sit back and oh well, whatever happens, or it's because of climate change or whatever. So I have sort of that attitude, and I think that attitude is a little bit different than a lot of people. I don't think this is a fight I'm going to win. The real fight is keeping my eyes focused on the good Lord above, because it's very hard to do that. I mean, I just read this thing on the AP this morning. Well, the facts don't disprove climate change. I'm like, on the hurricanes, I'm like, what the heck is that? What do you mean they don't disprove it? Right? It doesn't. You're right. You're right. The fact that Florida hasn't gotten hit the way they used to get hit doesn't disprove climate change. But the problem is that the climate's always been changing. There's always cycles. So how do we know it's because of man doing that? But they write this stuff. I mean, you want to cherry pick? It's funny. They go, "Oh, they're cherry picking this." Fine. If I can cherry pick something, certainly means there's another argument, because it means that there's something that counters what you're saying. I'll cherry pick another hurricane fact. New England between 1938 and 1991 was hit once every 7 years by a hurricane. Since 1991, they have not been hit. All right. So, right, that's an astounding fact, right? And yeah, okay, but we could go and say, well, look at what's happened in the Canadian Maritime Province. You've had two monster hurricanes hit this century, Juan and Fiona over there, right? So, okay, you got that over there. Well, I got this over here. I look at a picture of Hurricane Carla, a Category 4 in the Gulf of Mexico, versus Hurricane Harvey. Hurricane Harvey, Category 4, they're not in the same class. I mean, the cloud deck from Carla covered the entire Gulf of Mexico, for goodness sakes, right? Even this storm that hit with Ian. I was on Hannity's show, and Marco Rubio, oh, it's an enormous storm. I go, no, it's average size as far as the size goes, right? And, oh, yeah, it's covering the entire state of Florida. I said, yeah, but see, that's what I'm saying, that in this day and age, there's so much information. The information's out there, but most people will not go and look for it. So anyway,
Okay.
that's an awfully long preamble.
Very good stuff. Do you think anybody on the alarmist side has any sort of the depth of knowledge that you do on historical hurricanes and historical weather? I don't see that over there.
I think Kerry Emanuel certainly does.
Okay.
But Kerry hasn't. I don't think Kerry is operationally forecast since he was. I graduated March 4th, 1978. I was working the next morning. All right. I'll give you an example. And I'm a ditch digger, Tom. I tell that to people all the time. But just imagine if someone assigns you to dig a ditch, right? And they have this. They're up there, and they're the foreman and the engineer, and they say, "Well, we got to do this." And you're sitting down there digging the ditch. Say, "Hey, listen, there's solid rock over here. You can't dig the ditch over here. You got to move it." And they keep saying, "No, there shouldn't be solid rock there because our calculations say there's no solid rock there." And meanwhile, the ditch digger's down there, and he's saying, all I got to do is move it over a little bit. But you got to understand something about all these people, okay? As you see, I brought up Kerry Emanuel. Kerry Emanuel does not like me, okay? I get that sense. I've never met him. I read everything he says. See, that's the difference. I'm sure Kerry Emanuel has not spent time reading any of the 2 million words, because 3/4 of them are gibberish anyway, that I've written. I've written over 2 million words in the last 20 years. Because when I worked at AccuWeather, I had the blog. I worked at Weatherbell. I began working at Weatherbell March of 2011. I have not missed a day. There has not been a day I have not produced product for my company since the day I started. Basically, people say, "Well, you're a Christian. Don't you take Sunday off?" Well, I give glory to God by being right. That's how I look at it. That's a kind of situation. I mean, I don't look at my job as a job at all. I look at it as Christmas every morning. I get to get up and unwrap the gift. The gift is the weather, and the challenge is the weather is presenting to me. So I think, because I read all this stuff, all right, and I sort of wonder about that. I think he's very brilliant. Eric Blake at the Hurricane Center, I mean, these guys really, really good. I mean, the guys at the Hurricane Center are all real good. They're all real good. In fact, I told Limbaugh one time, I said, I did tell him directly. I told David, because I'm friends with David, I said, could you please tell your brother? He lives 40 miles away from the National Hurricane Center. I'm sure they would love to give him a tour of the National Hurricane Center, because he was totally off his rocker accusing them of trying to whip up panic. In fact, to some extent, I thought it was the opposite way at times, all right, that they were missing some things. All right. And that's what makes the world go round. And I kept saying, David, you got to tell him to go over there because I got tired of listening. I mean, I liked Rush, and obviously I love that kind of freedom. You notice a lot of these guys are not high-powered educational guys. They basically just Hannity's the same way. Hannity's he's written a couple of books, but if he had an autobiography, that's remarkable what that guy's going through, right? So I used to get really mad because these guys are really, really good. And, I owe them a debt of gratitude. Back in the 1980s, Bob Case and Gil Clark at the Hurricane Center, I would spend $400 a month talking to them on the phone during the 80s, right? Because tapping their knowledge, Gil Clark and Bob was really, really smart. And these guys were just nuts and bolts basic forecasting. Neil Frank, I used to be critical of Neil Frank, and that was stupid because now I'm like Neil Frank as far as understanding. Neil Frank has always been a very committed Christian, and he's always understood that the majesty of God trumps the ability of us, not so much to forecast it, but to actually control a situation, right? And I used to get really mad at, what do you mean you don't know where it's going? You're the director of her, you're supposed to know where it's going. And then I started realizing that what he was saying was basically had the same kind of linkage I look at stuff. No one knows tomorrow, Tom. We believe something about tomorrow. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
But belief, to act on a belief takes faith and work. So there's a natural synergy. It would be very easy if the answer was given you all the time. Okay, it's very easy to do something. It's not easy to do something when you don't really know the answer. Okay, You saw what happened the other day. People are so ingrained with computer models. The climatologists with their computer models, which are busted, right? With the hot runaway warming. And it's obvious why they're going to bust. It's Le Chatelier's principle. I mean, even if CO2 has been introduced into the system in a manner where it's going to affect the system, the atmosphere will respond. And I'm watching it respond right in front of me. Now, most of the guys that are on my side of the issue, they want to respond so fast they're seeing cooling when there is not cooling. Okay, at least not the way they're measuring stuff. And what the entire scientific community, both our side and their side, don't understand is temperature is a very poor metric for climate, right? Wet bulb temperatures would be better. Better still, quantification of water vapor, because it explains everything if someone understands saturation mixing ratios, that small, very, very tiny amounts of water vapor affect where it's cold and dry more. So consequently, where it's cold and dry will warm up with increased water vapor. Now, if you're going to argue CO2 is controlling the oceans, all I need to do is show you the map of the Pacific Rim as far as the volcanoes go and where the warm water is in the Pacific. I said, well, could you explain that to me? That pretty much looks like a one-to-one correlation. So if there's increased underwater volcanic activity plus a natural intersection of large-scale multi-century cycles, okay, sort of like what they call the rogue wave. You hear all these Bermuda Triangle stories, right? That guys going along, all of a sudden a 40-foot wave shows up out of nowhere, right? Well, that's just an intersection of a bunch of other waves that, independent of themselves, didn't cause much, but if they intersected, boom, right, it goes right up. And I suspect, and Gray was big on that. Bill Gray was always big on that. So wait, we don't know what's going on. These different cycles within cycles, and blah 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 blah. That could be going on too. All right, but what we also see is a natural response. And Dr. Willie Soon, I'm trying to get clarification on, as I understood last time I was with Dr. Soon, he would say that they had a study that shows that the Hadley cell is not there. All right, it's basically been destroyed, which would make sense. Because that would mean that the distortion that is taking place, with warming more in the north than in the south, is wrecking upward motion patterns. What does that mean? It means that trapping hotspot is shot to the four winds. See, that was a huge, and see that is what I really get mad at. That's what I really get mad at. You guys said that they were going to be trapping hotspots in the tropics, over the tropics. That would be used if you're putting a lid over the tropics because of All you need to do is study the amount of energy in a parcel of air that has a wet bulb of 85 versus a parcel of air that has a wet bulb of 32. You'll get it right off the bat, right? If you're saying that that's getting trapped there, it's over. They're right. It'll run away with it. Not only that, but the key was, well, if you have all that area south of 20 north just warm, it'd just be orgies of hurricanes coming out there one after another. What's happened? It's warmed more to the north than to the south. It's not warming up that much, all right, in the tropics compared to in fact, this is a get a kick out of AOC. Oh, the climate refugees. How can they can't detect the change in temperatures? And you've been having record-breaking crops in Central America for the last 25 years. And people, oh yeah, that's right, they're coming up here because they're climate refugees, right? I mean, it's hotter in Texas than it is down in, some of the tropical areas, for goodness sakes. So what happens is that when I look at all this, I go, well, this makes sense. This is what should happen. Instead, it's cooling over the tropics. I put this on Twitter 25 times, and I can always tell that no one really pays attention, because that's the biggest thing in the world. For the last 11 months, the 500 millibar levels over the tropics have been averaging below normal, right? The mid-tropospheric level. And that's a huge, huge thing. It's probably the reason why we're not seeing, even in the tropical Western Pacific, which is the most important basin as far as development goes, and climate signal. If you want to look at climate signals, you look at the Western Pacific, okay? Because that's where you got Asia going against the Pacific. You got 2/3 of the global, 50% of the global ACE index coming out of the one basin, and a lot of the Madden-Julian oscillation, a lot of the source region is in there. And you can't get anything developing south of 20 north. I think we did finally have a typhoon hit the Philippines. It's probably the first about 5 years, or for 3 or 4, at least 3 years. I know that. And all the development in the Western Pacific is relatively enclosed with short track storms. I put a map of 1959 out. It's like a in the deep tropics between 15 and 20 north. There's like a railroad track through there, right?
Okay.
So you're seeing that. And some of my son, I don't look at what other, it's funny. The way I look at trolls is this. Hey, listen, every once in a while I'll see when someone hammer me, I'll get 35 followers, right? And I say, I have this rule, never punch down. That was Trump's problem. Okay, if you're telling me the New York Times is a failed paper, why are you always punching it? Right? If it's failed, we'll just let it go, or Joe Scarborough, or whatever. I could never figure the guy out, except I think that while he loves his country, he loves his God, he loves himself. I mean, that's got to be the reason, right? And it's a shame. I mean, when I saw him doubling down on Dorian the way he was, I was like, what is it? Now that was a blatant case. On Saturday, he came out and said that. By Friday night, I was on Mark Levin's show saying it's going up east to Florida. A lot of people got mad at me for hammering him. I go, what are you doing? There was an article on CFAC that Trump's Dorian chart doesn't work. It doesn't. He got a cone from Thursday. I couldn't even believe it. A spaghetti bottle, which is just, I just did not even. And the other thing, I'm like, who is advising him? Who's talking to him? Okay, President Trump, you've got this path going through Florida. Are you aware that hurricanes across Florida never come out as strong on the other side, that it's not going to be a major hurricane in Alabama? But this is what I'm talking about. I don't understand. We were taught in the 60s and 70s to question authority. I don't care if you're right, left, I don't care what it is. You always go look for what you don't see, right? Because chances are there's something there that you need to see. And you got to ask yourself, well, why is this person just showing me this? You see me on Twitter, I show the opposite side all the time. I get people mad at me, right? I get the solar scientists all mad at me. I go, I'm sorry. If you want to play that card about, low solar, it's going to get cooler. What happened? Where's the energy from the 200 years of high sunspot activity, if you're believing that that's causing this whole thing? All right, where's that stored? Well, it just doesn't go away in the oceans overnight. And guess what? You reduce incoming solar radiation over the tropics, you're going to encourage El Ninos. So that stored energy is going to come out. What do you do? I had a guy I used to train outstanding wrestler, two-time national champ from Arizona State, Dan St. John. He's at 4.0 in physics and math. I mean, the guy was just, so one of these guys, you meet these guys, you go, how can they be that good at wrestling and that smart, like also. And the reason why he gravitated toward me is, meteorology, I had some math background, so I could talk reasonably with him on some things, but it was so theoretical because I wrote this paper and it says the first sign that we're really going to warm up is the globe has to cool for a while. And he explained to me what he's looking at. It's going, it was literally this guy is 1991 explaining how blocking was going to develop in the north, right? He says, it's going to warm up here, has to get colder under here, then it will adjust and the real signal will come out 2100 or something like that, right? And he may be right, all right? But my argument with the guys, okay, suppose you're right. Suppose eventually this is all going to where in a handbasket. If you continue freedom and capitalism, you will have the solution you need. The solution's out there. Plant more trees, nuclear power plants, and point of generation carbon capture. That is available. That is now available. And last year I was trying to push this. This company contacted me and said, hey, listen, we know your stance, blah, 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 but this will get rid of the problem. I said, this is great. I go, because then I can give Oz, AKA John Kerry, the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West, which is CO2. If I give him that CO2, we have zero net emissions, okay? He won't have to bully his own country anymore, which is what these people do. It makes me sick. They bully the United States. Oh, we have 4% of this, and we only do 25%. We have 4% of the world's population using 25% of the resources. Yeah, and then we nicely try to help people with it. Seriously, I mean, what do you think we're doing over here? My dad used to say about Hispaniola, the island of Hispaniola. He says, we owe them foreign aid, right? We should. This is back in the 60s. I go, do you realize how many hurricanes hit that place? That if they did not hit that place and come to the United States, no one would be living on the coast. And we show me the tracks. You had, for instance, in the 60s, you had Cleo, Inez, Flora, all go into Hispaniola. Once they hit Hispaniola, they don't come out the same way. Look at David, 79 went into Santo Domingo, it was a strong 4. By the time it got to Florida, it was a 1. Even Dorian weakened coming to the coast, right? So, so I'm like, okay, your argument is that we're a force for bad, so we got to shut it down. My argument is that I could get the GDP of every Italian in the United States. I'll use Italian because I'm Italian. I'll get the GDP of every Italian in the United States or Italian heritage. Someone had some in Italy, and it's greater than the GDP of Italy. Now, how do you explain that, right? How's that even possible unless the system actually works? It's why Alex Epstein, have you had Alex on?
I have not. I'd love to do that.
Oh, you've got to get him on. Because listen, there's 4 books that sum the whole thing up, in my opinion. Epstein's moral case for fossil fuels and now his fossil future. I sort of lump them together, okay? The moral case for fossil fuels was just lights out great, okay? Schellenberger's book is big. My book is sort of, it looks like a comic book or something like that. But these guys are smarter than me. But it goes right to the point. It comes down and says this is spiritual combat here, because if free will is God's greatest gift to man, anything trying to stop that free will and stop your freedom, what are you doing, right? You become independent, and it's your choice. See, that's a great thing. If someone, people scream and yell at Christianity and all these religious people, and you got to remember, religion is like ivy on a tree, right? It makes a tree look good, but it's really still a parasite. I'm talking about religion, okay? So consequently, that pursuit is very, 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 very hard. People say, oh, Christianity is a crutch. No, it's not. It's not a crutch. It's a stick that keeps beating you forward because it says, listen, you know what? It's not good enough to be where you are. You have to, you're expected to be excellent. Okay, that's what you ever watch Penn State wrestling. That's what the wrestling coach says. You're a child of the most mighty God. So you're supposed to take on challenges, pursue the truth, and come up with the answer. But you need freedom to do that. You need competition to do that. And to just lay back and say, well, this person did this to me or that person did this to me. I got bullied every day. I went back in the 60s, a short, fat kid, you know. It was almost like culture shock. I didn't get bullied in Texas. Everybody was nice in Texas. I was even remarking I was down at the Aggie game back in September, and I was just down in Alabama for their game. And the people are so darn nice. I can't even believe it. How darn it's like you know, right? I go up north, and it's like the closer you get to New York City, the more of a war zone it is, you know. And so this kind of thing all sort of wears at me, because I observe things. So if you have that freedom to pursue, we will come up with the answer, especially in light of the fact that this is what bothers me, Tom. The facts show that we have come up with the answers. We have adapted. We have done what Alex Epstein says. The moral case. I mean, we have 4 times the amount of people on the planet today than 1930, 1/28th the amount of climate deaths. Hello, right? How is that even possible if you prorated that? So you throw my book in there, which comes at you and then shows weather example after weather example. I mean, I could go on forever with that stuff. All right. I mean, I give 4 or 5 examples for each thing, and then I propose a solution. I also, and I'm glad I put them in. I had to pray about put it in the chapters on COVID because they're predicting what's going on now. They predicted it's almost as if, hey, listen, if they're going to get scared and do this, we have a constant hammer to beat them over the head with, scaring the daylights out of them with that. And it all dubs in to Levin's book, American Marxism. All right. Now, I don't care where you're from, or what you do. All right. It's a failed system. It's failed every time. But the arrogance of people who were, gradually, it's almost like you're boiling a frog and you're just gradually turning up the heat, doesn't know what's going on. The arrogance is that, well, we could do it better. We could do it better. And they said, well, look at they try to use Christianity a lot of times. Look at the walk of Christ. He advised you to give away everything. And I go, that's right. And it was your choice. It's not like, it's like, what's that old joke? The guy comes up and says, we've got to make sure this person's warm. Let me have your coat and I'll give him your coat, right? Well, shouldn't that be my choice, right? Absolutely. And maybe that's my moral choice, right? So a lot of this stuff to me hooks into that, all right? And it hooks into a front. I don't think I'm when I profess my spirituality, people, oh, you praise to God to get answers. No, I don't. I pray to God for the strength to answer his questions, right? And I don't want him to give me anything. Anything that's given to you, I mean, grace and mercy I want, but anything, it's usually anything that is free is worth what you paid for, as far as making you stronger, all right? It's like in the gym. It's like you have to push the weight. It's not going to go up by itself. You're not going to get stronger just looking, and I used to like this, what was it, Dirk Bogarde and Sandy something. They wrote this new age physical fitness book called Life Extension. And it just swept through the 80s. And basically their argument is that if you ate right and did what we did, you don't have to exercise, right? And they showed, what was funny was they were proud of their physiques. And I go, I wouldn't want to look like him. Like he was just skinny, right? I go, okay, you're skinny, right? It's like, whatever, right? But you have to have a challenge. You have to learn when adversity comes, to try to turn it into an advantage. Look at the lessons of the buffalo and the cattle. When a storm's coming, what do the cattle do? They did a research project on buffalo and cattle.
Oh, I don't know about this.
Storms coming, cattle spread out. That's not what the buffalo do. They turn into the storm and march into the storm. So they did this research project out, and they found that there were much fewer deaths among the buffalo population confronting the storm than the cattle trying to run away from the storm. Very, very interesting how nature works. You look at a book of one of my favorite verses, scriptural verse. This is in the the Book of Mormon, the Latter-day Saints, Helaman 5:12, about the storm. There's a passage about the devil shall throw his whirlwind. You need faith to stand in the storm, and all this. And then I go, that's interesting, because you have to face the storm. That's what Helaman 5:12 is about. But you need faith. You need to be strong to do it. That's what the Buffalo were about. And then I remember Springsteen was out in Nevada, and I love Bruce Springsteen. I don't care what his politics are. I trust the art, not the artist. So what happens is, I just like to talk to him for 5 minutes, because I need to ask him, how can you write this song and then say what you say? I just don't get that, right? But he had this song called The Promised Land. An open line on a rattlesnake speedway in the Utah desert. I spend all my money and go back into town, right? So he was in Utah. He was going through a very tough period. They wouldn't let him play. His original manager had him locked up in one of these contracts, and they control everything. So he had to just basically exist by playing bars and small concerts for 3 years. So he and Miami Steve went out to Nevada and Utah. And I said, this guy has got to be like, I just know the way Springsteen is. You got to be looking at that Mormon culture, right? So the last verse of the song is, there's a dark cloud rising on the desert floor. I packed my bags and I'm headed straight into the storm. Mm-hmm. Going to be a twister to blow everything down that ain't got the faith to stand its ground. I'm like, this guy got to have been digging into the Book of Mormon, because that's Helaman 5:12. But you see what the linkage is here, that whether you're looking at the Book of Mormon, you're looking at the Bible, you're looking at Buffalo, you're looking at Bruce Springsteen, all of them talk about having to confront a storm, right? And it seems to me what has happened today is we've been sold a bill of goods by people that say you don't have to have the storm, that there should be no storms, and that every day in climate should be a high of 75, a low of 58. Let's see, it doesn't rain except from 3 to 5 in the morning, just enough to water your garden and make sure your unicorns have grass to chew on. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. So I don't know. I'm all over the place here, which is I think it's like Bob Dylan. Whatever he thinks, it comes out of his mouth when he writes a song. But I hope people get the impression. I try to give them impression. I believe I'm a genuine person. I believe I have a pursuit that it's a gift. I'm not saying that I have the gift to be the smartest guy out there. I have the gift of pursuit, the gift that the good Lord said, you know what? I don't want you to worry about whether you're the smartest guy, the best guy, or whatever. I want you to confront the questions I ask, see my hand in it, and give people the answers. And by doing that, whoever wants to listen, listens. Whoever doesn't, doesn't. And I'll tell you what, I'm sort of, and this is going off about 40 minutes here. I'm going to tell you something, folks. I'm not here to answer your questions, all right? In fact, if I help people so that they stop and think and ask questions, I think that's a good thing. If they come up with a conclusion I'm wrong, great. But at least go do the work. If you're going to support a position, go do the work. This is important. Yeah, I've always gotten a kick out of the left. They talk about reproductive rights, right? Mm-hmm. And I have this idea that the most racist thing there is abortion. And that's simply based on statistics. When I look at how many people of color, all right, did not get a chance to live, okay? If all those people of color had a chance to live, the percentage of people of color in this country would be 2.5 times what it is today. That would increase the melting pot, right? The America is supposed to be this melting pot. It's not supposed to be a salad. It's a melting pot, all right? We're supposed to all the colors are supposed to bleed into one in this country. That's how it is designed. That's why I don't care who wrote the darn Constitution. It could be 4 men from the moon for all I care. And I don't care about their color. Whether you hate them or not, they had the intention of making this a melting pot. And they were trying to design it the way they thought their Heavenly Father wanted it designed. Now, if you want to try to eliminate that, what I say to you is, well, if there were 45 more million people of color in this country, that melting pot would be working a heck of a lot better. So who is stopping the melting pot? And then I look at biblical examples. Okay, I look at big. It wasn't 250 Europeans that went into Africa and conquered all of Africa. That's not what happened. They were sold into bondage. Well, think of Joseph in the Bible. He was sold into bondage by his brothers, right? Think about this. Sold into bondage by his brothers. And then what happened? He took over. He basically was running Egypt. So I look at that and I go, well, maybe what was supposed to happen was that the very key to the success of the American dream was the increase in the amount of people that were sent here against their will. Same way Joseph was sent against his will, because that would have supplied the key to complete the melting pot. And when I look at things, when I look at what has happened here as far as that goes, and you said, well, how is that like climbing away? Do you understand that it's deception that has stopped that, right? Just like the deception in climate. And when I say deception, I mean that any shooting down of the opposite opinion, all right? The opposite opinion, all right? So you've got a bunch of people talking about choice and all this, and that's okay, fine, all right? I'm pro-life, but guess what? I think that issue is probably a divine test. And who am I to get in the way of a divine test? A person has their own right to choose, and that's how I am about that. A lot of my Christian friends, I'm evangelical Christians, say, wait, you can't do this. I go, no, maybe that's the test. But what I get mad is they overturn Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade doesn't stop abortion. It simply says use the democratic process to figure out what your state wants to do, which I guess these people don't want to teach true democracy. But you see what I'm talking about here? You see the linkage? You have a situation where potentially by not doing this, if let's say all those children of color had been born, America would be a very different country today. We wouldn't have a lot of these problems, all right? There'd be more interracial marriages that's going on. There'd be more blending. The stock, would grow stronger. People grow stronger. And, I've always, from when I worked at the Point Diner in Summers Point, I've always had. I used to love, my first favorite, my dad, my hero. Then there was then of course Bill Cole, my wrestling coach, and John Kerr, Penn State meteorology professor, and then there was Floyd Foster. I tell this story. Floyd Foster. Floyd Foster was a line cook at the Point Diner in Summers Point. 65 years old, worked on Baltic Avenue, Atlantic City. Was from South Carolina, and he just gave me the devil every day. Just and that man loved me so much. He was always, it was 95 degrees back there. I'd be walking by and he'd call me some, because my name is Bastardi, make a crack about that. He'd come up and hug me, don't you know I love you? I love you like that. I go, yeah. But one day I remember I was sitting there talking to him, and he used to call me young blood too. He says, see this dirty dish rag? I says, yeah. He said, most people would throw this away, but a good man will find a use for it. No matter what, a good man will find a way to use whatever they're given. All right, they will figure it out. And that's, I've always had a natural affinity, and that's when I really started thinking, some of the stuff that I saw going on. I became, let's put it this way, I became sort of like a mini Italian RFK. I still love RFK Jr. We probably don't agree on a couple of things, but the guy gets out there and he swings. I always think if I ever ran into RFK Jr., I bet you if I showed him this data, he would think twice about what he says about climate. Of course, he's big on the vaccine stuff and being Zama. See, it's kind of funny because he says he used to snow more in DC. Well, you were in DC in that period in the 60s where 4 of the 5 Christmases were white. Right? So you were just there for that snapshot when your father was serving in the Kennedy administration and was a senator, And then, he's getting ready to run for president. It used to, there was a very cold time in there, 61, and the 63 storm came up, 65, the 66 Donner, we used to call it the Donner and Blitzen song, Christmas Eve, 66, right? Washing that full of snow. So he remembers that stuff. Oh, it doesn't do that anymore. Well, it wasn't doing it all that often before, right? So, I think that the big key is that you have to look at other people's opinion. If you preach tolerance, you ought to be tolerant, and you ought to look and see what they're saying. If they're wrong, they're wrong. Okay, but they keep yelling about climate change for the children, and yet I go, well, how many children were supposed to be here, but they're not here? You seem to support that, stopping some children, and then, well, it's almost like, well, we'll be pledging a fraternity here. If you make it out of the womb, you're home. Go tap the keg over there. It's like, so it's just kind of weird to me when I look at things that there are self-evident contradictions or things that need questioning. And when you look at the climate and weather and you realize the majesty of that, and yet it's just a microcosm of the big picture, the entire picture, you sit there and go, boy, maybe there is something going on that's bigger than all of us, and we ought to take a look at that. So anyway.
Okay. All right. You're going to go work out?
Yeah, I'm competing on October 29th. So, that's the thing. When you get old, my one buddy says, yeah, those old guys get up there with saggy butts and flabby guts, right? And it's funny. I always feel like I should go in absolutely ripped, right? Which is what I try to do. I try to at least come out being the most ripped guy in my class. I don't have real good symmetry, but ripped now is 154 pounds at 5'9". That's not exactly massive. Somebody, oh, you must be taking growth hormone. Well, if I'm taking growth hormone, it ain't working. Because I know, so I still competed with some guys over 60. I competed guys in the Capital Grand Prix a couple of years ago. He was 61, and he was a professional 61. It was my height in 240, and shredded, right? I was like, that's interesting. But you know what? That's good, because that's their choice. They could go do that. I'm not saying they did, but I know what I'm going to run up against. Do you understand that? If you know what you're going to run up against, makes you train harder, makes you focus better, and turns into a positive. So hopefully I didn't offend too many people. Let me end with this. I want everybody out there not only to Wang Chung tonight, which is a song, but to enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you got.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you later. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.